Tec Sounds presenta Territorio Negocios.
Welcome to Territorio Negocios by EGADE Business School and Tecnológico de Monterrey Undergraduate Business School. I am Jaime Martinez, and I will be your guide in this episode. Welcome to Territorio Negocios. Today's episode is going to be in English because of the incredible guests that we have. And the topic of this episode is unraveling the potential of the mind to build a better workforce. I am Jaime Martinez, director of EGADE Business School in Mexico City, and our guests are Jacqueline Carter, partner and director of Potential Project. Welcome, Jacqueline.
Hello, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here.
Wonderful to have you. And we also have Diego Lainez, who is CEO and founder of Dare to Learn. Welcome, Diego.
Thank you, Jaime. Very nice to be here. Thank you.
Well, the topic that brings us together today is pertinent and important to any kind of organization nowadays. And it has to do with leadership, with leading teams, with building a workforce. It has to do with employee well-being and mental health, especially during the pandemic. And we can all agree that leading teams has always been tough, but perhaps never as much as today. Organizations around the world are experiencing a significant shift from shareholder wealth to employee well-being. And being a good leader today goes beyond management to keeping teams engaged, becoming more approachable and human, and being compassionate, without, of course, overlooking performance and productivity. Moreover, it seems that great leadership begins with a healthy mind, and that's incredibly clear today. According to the Washington Post, downloads for mindfulness apps, and this is just a good example of how relevant this topic is becoming, downloads for mindfulness apps hit a 25% increase during March 2020, and users spent about 85% more time, almost double the amount of time in those apps than before the pandemic. How can a clear and present mind help leaders build better workforces? Today, we unravel the potential of the mind of the leader. And that is our introduction, and we're now going to start with this discussion amongst our guests. Several studies have shown that contrary to popular belief, working from home is actually producing a better turnaround on projects and increasing productivity. However, it is also clearly taking its toll on mental health. There's an overload of notifications, pressure, long work hours, and constant multitasking that are hurting people's ability to focus and be attentive towards their tasks. And I'd like to start with you, Jacqueline. What makes mindfulness an appropriate response to this mental health crisis?
Well, thank you so much, Jaime. And I couldn't agree more that mindfulness is a critical skill in our current environment, which is really challenging. And it's challenging, as you mentioned, not only for leaders, but for all of us. And specifically, if we look to be able to help us to have a common understanding, because mindfulness can mean many things to many people. And of course, with an audience with different cultural backgrounds, the way that we like to look at mindfulness is the ability to be able to be here now, to be able to be focused, to be able to be clear, so that I can be present with the task at hand and present with the people that I'm with. Now, exactly as you said, in this world right now where we're all working from home, we're all plagued with notifications, distractions, so many things that are coming at us, the pressures that we're experiencing not only in our daily work life, but also in our home life. Our ability to be able to be here now is challenging, but it's critical because if we're not here now, we're wasting our time. We're missing out. I mean, if I'm not fully present in this session right now, I am not going to be able to be at my best, and I'm not going to be able to have the kind of impact that I want to have. And it's not only true for us in our daily work life, but it's also true if I'm not fully present when I'm with my family or with my friends. I'm also missing out. And the cool thing, and probably most of the listeners know about mindfulness, is it's a trainable skill. So this is something that we can actually train ourselves, essentially by going to the mental gym, to help us moment to moment to be able to be more focused, to be able to be more present, and ultimately to be able to make better use of our precious time.
And it's a habit just the same way that many of us have gotten or developed the habit of trying to be everywhere at the same time and having being inattentive and being thinking about 4 or 5 things at once and not quite being present in any of them. And that's also a habit. So it's something that it seems that we can definitely break out of and make, in fact, the mindfulness be an easier way of being eventually than how we often are.
Well, Jaime, and if I could just jump in on that, because I think that this could be really relevant and important science. Exactly what you said is that our brain basically is plastic, and the way that we use our brain becomes how our brain gets used. And so if we're multitasking all the time, and this is again backed by research, then our brain becomes really good at multitasking, which means we're really good at being all over the place, being distracted, being overwhelmed, feeling under pressure. And that becomes our default way of operating. If we train ourselves, as you said, to be able to be more focused, to be able to be more present, to switch tasks when we need to switch tasks, and all of us need to switch tasks all the time, then we can actually be more efficient and more effective on habit, exactly as you said. So there's great science that backs that up.
And I'd love to connect that with learning and reskilling, something that's becoming increasingly important, whether it's someone at work telling you that you have to acquire or develop or deepen certain skills, or it's yourself, realizing that in terms of progress in your career, you do well to learn more about something. And that connects with Diego, who's obviously very acquainted with the world of reskilling and upskilling. And again, reskilling and upskilling are as mandatory to a healthy mind as they are to building better workforces. And according to the World Economic Forum, half of the world's workforce will need reskilling by 2025, which is just around the corner, as adoption of technology continues to increase. Diego, with employees juggling work with household responsibilities, and by the way, there's a gender take in this, because we do know that women still, unfortunately, have more of those responsibilities set on them. What do you think are the key challenges for remote learning as we struggle with reskilling, keeping up with work and other responsibilities, and also trying to be mindful and being in the here and now? So if you have any advice in terms of that, I'm sure you do, our audience, I'm sure would appreciate it.
Yes. Thank you, Jaime. And actually, we just went through the masterclass with Jacqueline about the mind of the leader, and being the mind of the leader, the core of this episode of the podcast. I'm trying to connect with the 3 elements that Jacqueline taught us in the masterclass, right? So I think it's completely there. We can frame it in the compassion, mindful, and selflessness. In which sense? Let me try to put that in a structured way. Let me see if I can do it. First of all, you need to be selfless, let's say, to let go the way you think things are or were, right? Like that will be like part of intellectual humility that you need to have, and that has a lot of selflessness, because you are letting go your identity. Let's say a lot of us teachers, facilitators, we were classroom-based facilitators, right? Like we were there, and suddenly everything changes, and we need to be very selfless to let go our way of thinking and doing things. So that will be the first part, right? Like I think it's the first thing you need to do to rethink education and to rethink learning, right? And then I will say that you need compassion, because it is the way it is, but what are you going to do about it, right? So my first part will be, and I will focus on the mindful one, because I think it's the hardest one. I'm going to say why later, but compassionate leadership and compassionate anyone who is in charge or responsible for people to reskill. First of all, to help others reinvent themselves, that will be a compassionate thing to do, right? How to do that? First of all, I think we need to stop copy-pasting things, because that was the first response, right? Like, let's copy what we've been doing, because everything was urgent. So we didn't stop to think, we just switch, as Jacqueline said, tasks. Second, we need to stop the confusion about 1 hour webinar is learning, right? Because everyone jumped to that. As soon as we were home, you cannot imagine how many people, how many customers jumped from no workshops, forget about that, 1 hour chunks. And I think that's a dangerous way to go. That will say, all right, you did it already, start thinking about that is not learning. That is just one part of a wake-up call maybe you can do in 1 hour, right? Great curator better facilitator. Put the effort on the pedagogy. Put the effort on being a challenger, on make it Socratic. It's the best opportunity we have for the flipped classroom to actually work. Let's people do the lecturing at their pace, and let's do homework together. Project-based, peer-reviewed. So we need to put the effort on creating cohorts.
And can I make a footnote there? For those of us hearing this episode, U Week is this incredible event that we have every year for the EGADE alumni, international alumni community, where we had Jacqueline Carter as one of her keynote speakers, and that's what Diego's talking about. And we do that every year with lots of content, and we try to update our alumni community. I'm sorry, Diego.
No, it's okay, and it's a good example because you put the effort up front of making the thing work. And you just didn't assume, you gave us the pre-work, we were prepared for that. So I think that's the flipped classroom concept. So I think this is the best opportunity we have now because we have been trying it for so long. Now is the only option, but we have to do it right. And I think this means also being technology savvy. It's a compassion thing to do, to be technology savvy, digitally savvy. And that's it. So you cannot hide behind this is too hard, because that is not being compassionate. You need to be a compassionate leader to put the role modeling on that. Another thing we need to do as on the learning side, and this has to do a lot with the multitasking and the amount of information we are receiving every day, we need to put the effort to catch attention, because people is more than ever playing with their mobiles, playing with their browsers. We don't have the chance to have them in classroom. So you need to put the effort with your background, with the music you use, with how you make the breaks. So that kind of pedagogy you need to actually take the best things of previous years. Now you need to think of entertaining, enrollment, content curation, peer pressure, right? Like peer review. So those kind of things, we have always talked about that, but we actually, a lot of us weren't designing for that. That connects me to the last part of the framework that Jacqueline and the mind of the leader is on the mindful. I think that's the most challenging one, because first of all, ourselves as teachers, as facilitators, to actually be there for the group, right? Like to actually not to just check our own agenda, but to check the agenda of the group. That's very hard, because you have your slides, right? Like what is the objective? To have my 80 slides, or to actually solve some problem for people? It's hard for people to be mindful. We haven't trained for that for long. So
it's countercultural, because as you were saying, Dave, you have so many things vying for your attention at the same time that it's quite there's a certain sense of rebelliousness in trying to be mindful and not giving in to all the bells and whistles and the social networks and whatnot. Everything that's competing around us, both physically and virtually, for our attention. But it takes courage, and it takes overcoming FOMO, fear of missing out, in a work sense, that you've got so much stuff going on and you're willing to block out and say, you know what, unfortunately I'm not available on Friday morning for this meeting. I mean, unless it's a super important meeting, and I'm just not available because there's just something else I need to do. And it can be frightening, and in a fast-paced work environment with a certain degree of competition, whether real or perceived amongst colleagues. But I do think that we can agree that, especially now with the pandemic, we've seen how we need to be much more intentional about our self-care and placing limits. And even as we were talking about training and reskilling and upskilling, being much more self-guided about that, because we're no longer spending as much time in the office, where it was, as I mentioned before, it was easier for a colleague or your boss to say, hey, you got to take this course or that course. Now sometimes you have to realize what you should work on and not on your own. And it goes back to being a little bit more self-reliant and giving yourself more of that self-care, which connects to my next question, Jacqueline. Concept of compassionate leadership, which I find fascinating. I'm sure it's going to be very interesting for our audience. Because we've got so much going on, as we were saying, and we need to be mindful, but it's hard to have limits between your personal life and your work life and the screen physically. You guys are here with me at home as I am with you, and there's kids running around the background and whatnot, and we need a new kind of leadership that can relate to that and knows how to better navigate and help your colleagues navigate such a situation. So how does compassionate leadership play into that, Jacqueline?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. And I just want to say, Diego, I loved everything that you said. So I just want to double click and say yes. And so thank you for that. And especially for us, I think as educators, as facilitators, as learners, we really need to be more compassionate for our students and for our participants to be able to really support the learning process. And I would say the same thing as leaders. And Diego already mentioned this, but I think in terms of what compassionate leadership, again, I'll give you a definition just to be able to help and to be able to put some framework around it, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what does it actually mean to be compassionate. Some people think it means being soft and being nice, and that's not how we see it at all. Compassion from our perspective is the intention to be of benefit. And really, when we look at it from a leadership perspective, it is around how can I be a best benefit to my organization, to my team, to the people in front of me, and also, and I'm really going to emphasize this, and also to myself. And I think that one of the things that we feel so strongly right now in today's environment is if we are not making sure that we are taking good care of ourselves as leaders, in other words, putting our own oxygen mask on, we are not going to be able to be good leaders for others. And there's all kinds of research that backs this up, but it is so important for us to start with an intention to be a benefit to ourselves, to take care of ourselves. But then secondly, when we look at that in terms of how does wise and compassionate leadership, what does that actually mean in the workplace? And the key thing that we've really landed on is to, again, try to make it simple, is it's really about being able to do hard things in a human way. So as leaders, leadership is not for the faint of heart. Let's just say that, right? You know, if you don't like making tough decisions or giving people tough feedback, you should not take a leadership role, because leadership is about making tough decisions, having tough conversations, giving people tough feedback to be able to support the business, to be able to support people realizing their potential. And so when we look at the fundamental of compassionate leadership, it is being able to do those things, but do it in a way that is respectful of the individual, that respects their dignity, that supports them in their journey, which could be either within the organization or potentially even within another organization, because sometimes that needs to happen too. But it really is about bringing more humanity into our leadership and really being able to, as leaders, support ourselves and support others to realize more of their human potential, because that is really what enables us to be able to create great organizations that do great things in the world. So that's really the essence of what we see as compassionate leadership.
And I see that concept, it connects wonderfully with so many other things going on. And it seems to be a constellation of changes that in a way are coherent. And it has to do with this sense of a more compassionate capitalism, more conscious organizations, caring more about the triple bottom line, about social and environmental impact. And I might even say and this could be controversial, like you previously said, Diego, a more balanced masculine and feminine approach to leadership and to building communities. And organizations and companies are ultimately communities. It's well known that people, what most appreciate of working for a given company is the people that they get to work with, the actual people. And I would obviously venture to say that a more purposeful organization can also be a much more open organization where ideas can be discussed, which can be more innovative and more critical in a constructive way, and to that degree more resilient and more creative, which is certainly necessary now more than ever.
Just before because I just want to say that I really want to emphasize this. What we are seeing, and again, Potential Project, we're a global organization. We're in 28 countries. And I think exactly what you say, we are at a really key inflection point for organizations, because now one of the things with the pandemic that we've seen is top talent can work for any organization around the world from the comfort of their home. So if you want to be able to make sure that you're able to attract and retain the best talent, you really better be able to think about how you're taking care of them, how you're treating them. So it's becoming more important than ever that we create compassionate cultures that enable us to be able to really create, especially in a virtual world, which is even more difficult, but it's possible. I think we've all seen that we can make that work. But it is actually the successful organizations of the future in our view, and I think probably get at least the three of you and hopefully the listeners agree, are the ones that are creating compassionate cultures where people feel connected, people feel connected to the purpose, people feel meaningful, and people actually enjoy working with each other because they care about each other. And who wouldn't want to work in a place like that? Right now, what we're all facing is there's so much uncertainty and there's so much unknown in the future for business. And if we create compassion, actually helps us to create psychological safety within our workplaces, which is the foundation for creativity. If you are in a fear-based culture, you are not going to bring your best ideas to the table. And right now, there is no company that can afford to have smart, passionate people that are afraid to bring their best ideas to the table. So again, why compassionate leadership is so critical to be able to create more compassionate cultures.
And that also, I mean, and we could go on and on, but that also connects with digital transformation, which is something that's very important to us at Agade, amongst many other topics in the field of management, and where we're trying to help companies all over the world, mainly in Mexico and Latin America. But sort of the leverage point to be able to transform and to challenge processes and introduce more technology and restructure organizations is having that kind of leadership, that kind of solidarity, and that kind of social fabric within the organization, that level of trust among colleagues, and ultimately that sense of purpose around which you can pivot and you can change the way that you do things if you're still serving that higher purpose as an organization. Diego, a lot of companies have approached the guy and asked us about how can we have more of that type of leadership, and oftentimes they can't quite express it, but it's exactly what Jacqueline describing, but do that in a remote context. It's just so difficult. It's so hard because it can be so cold, and at the same time it's tiring that have all your interactions be through a screen with everything that entails. This laser focus and seeing yourself on the screen. And it adds to the burnout. So I don't know if you have any advice for our audience in terms of your perspective and your work with many organizations in terms of training and development and remote work, and within this frame of trying to be more mindful, more compassionate, more sensitive.
Yes, I mean, I will try to just complement what you guys said because you were like on point, right? I will share a couple of stories probably to spice it up. Because I have at least two to share. One is from one of our training courses, which is actually remote leadership. Dare to Learn was born in 2016 as a remote company. We have always been remote or distribute, as we like to say, because we do have an office where you want to go if you want to go. And well, now we don't, but we used to. So we have a couple of scratches and things that we have learned. And let's say in one of these courses for one of a very big company here in Mexico, right? Subsidiary for an international, etc. At the end of the training, I'm going to say more or less what the concepts of the training are regarding compassion from my side, my point of view. There was this guy that said, well, we were reflecting about the learnings, etc. So, well, what I learned here is that this is about being a better person, right? Well, you got it, right? Like that's leadership. And I cannot agree more with Jacqueline when she said that if you don't want the burden of being a leader, don't be a leader, right? And it's okay. Maybe it's not your time. Maybe sometimes, unfortunately, it's not your decision if you want to grow. But once you come of age, that being a leader is not, and the extra work is not being emotionally and compassionately attached. That's not the extra work. This connects with the second story. We were in U Week, as you mentioned. There was some comments in the chat about, well, yeah, but how do we do this without the extra work, the extra burden? I said, well, I think you have it backwards, my friend. That is the work. The other things you think being a leader are, that is not the work. That is the management part, right? And the definition between a boss and a leader is something we need to struggle now, or manager and leader. The actual work of the leader is the emotionally charged work, connect, take people to their best, taking obstacles out of the way.
The coaching function.
Yes,
right?
Exactly. I mean, what we mentioned in the leadership remote training, we have some dimensions, which one of them is for sure compassion is the one we leave that to the end because it's the most important one. But you know what? You need to set priorities. You need to fight for those priorities with your team. for your team, not your team, for your team, right? I mean, you are the one that needs to defend the time for their focus time. I mean, you are like I don't know, like the parent. I don't like that analogy because I don't think companies are families. They are high performance teams. But so if you are the coach, you're gonna defend your players. You're gonna defend their training times. You're gonna set the expectations. They get to know you at a deeper level that we are used to, and that's the way it works in remote. How can we do this in remote? By accelerating the things that we were, I will say, wrongly used to in the office space to happen. Like, okay, I'm going to spend 5 years with this person, and maybe after 5 years, I'm going to know what kind of movies she likes, what kind of food is her favorite, what's the name of her dog. You actually need to accelerate that by design. So we have a tool that is called Getting to Know You, and it's 40 questions that you need to ask. I was rehired this July by a company, and it was on my second week. Please answer these 40 questions. Here are my 40 questions. I'm sorry, this kind of feels weird, but this is the way. We don't need to spend 5 Christmas holidays, company parties to get to know each other. So you need to be deliberate about setting priorities and defending them, letting people know why their work is important, right? To avoid the disengagement of not knowing why you're doing it, and getting to know people in a very deep way. So yes, it's emotionally charged. Yes, guess what? That's the job. So, and in that sense, that is the only way to being, from my point of view, to actually being compassionate. And I think trust, as you mentioned, Jaime, I don't know if it's a byproduct or what, but it actually creates trust, which is the other element of remote working. And I just want to close with, well, it's not a story. It's something that actually had a lot of impact on I'm pretty sure Jacqueline must know this, on my understanding of compassion. When I heard a podcast between where they talk about the conversation with Fred Kaufman, and I'm pretty sure you guys know at Tec de Monterrey, and probably Jacqueline too, and Jeff Weiner, who used to be the LinkedIn CEO, and Fred is telling him about, compassion without action is ruthlessness, right? I mean, you need to act. It's just empathy, let's say. So I think when you understand that, it takes courage, but courage is part of the job description, even though if it's not anywhere in the job description. So if you sign in for that, be ready for that, and do things, be a better person, work on being a better person, and you're probably on the right path.
Now, Diego, you mentioned one of several techniques that you use, which is actually going through a questionnaire, a survey of, just personal aspects of the people that you get to work with, so that you can more easily relate, and eventually, that can lead into greater trust. Now, Jacqueline, as we approach the end of this episode, and again, as I was saying, it's wonderful having both of you, because I'm sure we could go on for a couple of more hours at the very least. How can companies avoid falling into this common situation? I'll make an analogy with the concern about mindfulness as a one movement that's there and of which we need more of. That oftentimes we see companies trying to latch onto that, but through sort of accessory activities in the periphery of the organization that has to do with, whether it's yoga or mindfulness practices or Tai Chi for employees or whatnot, but without any actual changes in the core of the culture of the day-to-day work. How could we avoid something similar happening to companies that do want to develop, embrace this different kind of leadership, but without it becoming, we'll just give them a workshop or whatnot, and that'll be it?
Exactly. No, I love that question. And just, from our perspective, mindfulness is not something that, should be like an after work activity, it's just a little course or something. I mean, of course that's beneficial for anybody that wants to take it up. But what we're looking at, and I think the conversation here, and I think what we're all passionate about, is actually creating more mindful cultures. So actually creating cultures where people are more present with each other, because guess what? When we're all paying attention to each other and focused on the same task, we get more done and it feels better and we get better company results. So I do think that from our perspective and in our work, it does need to be looked at in terms of business outcomes. So not just companies that look at it as being something like yoga or something nice to have, and not to put down yoga because I love yoga, but it's not some side activity. It has to be linked directly to business outcomes. And in our work, we actually look at a return on investment. So by investing in bringing in opportunities to not only look at how to support individuals and being more present, more focused, but actually teams, departments, how does that actually help us to be able to be more present with our with our customers? How does that help us to be able to achieve our business outcomes? And measuring it and being very scientific about it, because then I think anything right now in an organization, anything that you do, you should measure. You should know that there's value in it. And I think that really, in terms of the measure, the return on investment in terms of investing in your people, because it's your people that are the ones that are supporting your companies, it's your people that are having the next great ideas, and then to really be able to make sure that you see the link to being able to look at business outcomes and results. And so that's how we frame it.
And how important it is, and I'd like to stress that these are changes that you want to measure, that are measurable, and that is perhaps the main way, or certainly an important way, to make sure that they're absorbed into the core of the company culture. Well, this has been a fascinating discussion with our two guests. We've gone over mindfulness and how that is now a key skill for organizations, which we can define mindfulness as being here now, and oftentimes how countercultural that can be when we're used to when we have this even bad habit of being everywhere, trying to be everywhere, and oftentimes nowhere really. And we have so many stimuli vying for and competing for our attention. We've discussed compassionate leadership, which is not a lenient or a soft leadership, but it's asking yourself, how can I be of benefit? And that has to do with coaching, and it has to do with holding people accountable and to doing the best you can to help them grow, however and wherever that may be. We've talked about trust and how that connectedness between colleagues, between leaders and their team members can be built. You mentioned, Diego, by getting to know them on a personal level, but also with managing and being empathetic with the challenges of remote work currently, and how oftentimes work life goes over into personal life, and just being more, better relating to that situation that, in fact, we're all immersed in. And how you said, Diego, leadership is not managing, it's actually the actual coaching, no? And helping people grow. And of course, Jacqueline, from her far and very substantial experience with organizations, shared with us how we should actually be measuring the benefits and the return on investment and the employee satisfaction and so forth of having more mindful and compassionate cultures. Well, this has been Territorio Negocios, unraveling the potential of the mind to build a better workforce. We had Jacqueline Carter with us. She is a partner and director of Potential Project, and Diego Lainez, CEO and founder of Dare to Learn. I was your host, Jaime Martinez, director of EGADE Business School in Mexico City, and we'll be hearing each other soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Jaime.
Thank you.
If you are into deep conversations with outstanding personalities, The World's Greatest Challenge might be the right podcast for you. Listen to bright minds discussing about the future of our planet and society. Available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and Google Podcasts.
Thank you for listening to an episode of Territorio Negocios, a podcast by EGADE Business School, Tecnológico de Monterrey Undergraduate Business School, and Tec Sounds. Executive producer Miguel Mejía, production assistant Marcelo Segura, Territorio Negocios producers Luis Vargas, Tirana del Castillo, Francisco Coria, Carla Díaz, Desiree Ukovitz, and Santiago Velázquez. Post-production Max Perez. Listen to the next episode of Territorio Negocios and all of Tec Sounds shows at Spotify, Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, and tech.mx/tech-sounds.